Okay, so the recording is now starting. Okay, so the overview. We're going to talk about business entity basics, contract law, understanding intellectual property law, and then we're going to do some interactive scenarios and then Q&A. Okay. So before we get started on the business entity basics, I just want to briefly give you a little background about myself. So once again, my name is Marissa Weatherly. I am a licensed attorney, and I've been working for a few years now, helping small business owners really analyze their businesses, whether it's their business structure. So if they have an LLC, if they're a sole proprietorship, if they have a corporation, a nonprofit, and then also understanding contracts, HR questions, and really all sorts of issues as well, and just overall general information about their businesses. And so in my experience, I've had a lot of work in the public sector, working with nonprofits, but also in the private sector, working with all sorts of business owners, just to really help them generally understand what they're trying to do with their business and if they're doing it legally. Because it's so important for you as a business owner to understand how you can be liable for something, or maybe how you think you own something, whether it's a product or a service you're providing. And you want to make sure you're protected so that you can continue to do your business with a peace of mind of understanding, like, okay, I got a lot of stuff to worry about as a business owner. The last thing you want to be worrying about is the legal issues and legal problems that can arise. And so today's presentation is really just to give you a general overview about different types of businesses, different types of issues that can arise with your business, and to really get the wheels turning so you can think, do I have this in place? I had this issue before. I wish I would have known this. And so, like I said, the presentation will be interactive. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions. And then also, hopefully, you'll learn some new things so you just have a better understanding of business in general. Okay. So, why does a business structure matter? Taxes. I think that's probably the number one thing that really scares business owners, or even just has you, a little bit antsy thinking about what is my tax implication of my business? How will it affect me personally? How could it affect my employees? But then also, how's it going to affect my business? The other thing is liability. Your structure matters because depending on how it's set up, you directly are liable just as much as your business. And so I always tell people, if your business is set up appropriately or in a way that suits you, you can present your business when you're entering into a contract. You put your business on the line, not yourself. And then the other thing is investments and partnerships. So, depending on how you're going to grow your business or scale your business, depending on how it's set up, it's not feasible to be a sole proprietorship, which is really just no structure at all. And you're like, oh, I'm going to get an investor. Well, what are they investing in? Your business or you? And that's something that somebody will want to know if they're going to be giving you a lot of money. So let's talk about some common legal structures. So we have a sole proprietorship, a limited liability company or LLC. You also have your general partnerships, corporations. So that includes an S Corp, a C Corp, and a 501(c)(3). And I always tell people, corporation, those SC Corp, 501(c)(3), that's a tax designation. And so that really just is like, I have a corporation, but how am I going to be taxed? And so those are what those differences are. Okay. So we'll start with sole proprietorships. So this is the simplest form of a business ownership, and it's automatically formed just by doing business. So if you're like, I'm going to start selling a product, I make cupcakes or something, I want to start selling them. I don't really have a business. I'm not doing an LLC. I'm just saying, Marissa's Cupcakes, come buy some. That's kind of like a sole proprietorship. So there's no paperwork, you streamline banking, you make the transaction, it goes into your account, that's it. But there's some cons with this one. You have unlimited personal liability. So that means it's just you on the line. The other thing is ownership restrictions. It's just you. And you're subject to self-employment taxes. So the taxes are going to flow straight to you as well. And so thinking about that, It's really important when you understand you're doing business as a sole proprietorship, it's just you. The next thing is partnerships. So the next structure type is partnerships. So there's different types. There's general and limited liability partnerships. Limited partnerships generally just have one partner that has unlimited liability, while the other partners have limited liability. And so what that means is typically in a partnership, somebody will have a general partner. So usually they may be the one, the big wig at the top. And they're the ones who are going to be on the hook for a lot of um, investments and contracts. That person or entity, depending on how it's set up, that is the general partner. While the other partners, they don't have that same type of exposure. Some pros of that is it's a simple structure to have a partnership. So the same way we talked about a sole proprietorship, where if I'm like Marissa's Cupcakes, I'm doing my cupcake business, it's just me. Now let's say I want to pull in my friend Paul. I don't know, Paul, I just made that up. But if I want to pull in a friend named Paul and I say, Paul, I need help. Will you do my marketing and then help me, carry my cupcakes around? We just formed a partnership. And so together we could both be on the hook. And even though we didn't sign any paperwork, the law typically will recognize as two people working together, conducting business this way, that's a partnership. And so, with that, it's nice. There's shared responsibilities. We're going to share the workload. We can help each other expand our network and our clients. But then that's also could be a con. We have shared liability. So, what if Paul decides, I'm going to tell this company that you're going to give 100 cupcakes and you're going to discount the price, but then he doesn't tell me that. And so I show up and I'm like, oh, I have this many cupcakes and at full price. It's like, well, Paul said we got this discounted price and you were providing 100 cupcakes. I'm on the hook for that because my partner has now made an obligation on behalf of our partnership. And so that's the thing too, the shared liability and the shared obligations. The other thing too is when you have a partnership, it's more difficult to change the business structure. So you can hop from one entity to another. Like, oh, I have a sole proprietorship. That's really not much. I can then go file for my LLC. But if I have a partnership, it's more difficult to do that because you have to agree with your partner on what's the next step. So it's 50-50. If they're not obligated to agree with what you want, so that could create some issues. And then also, there's exit strategy options that are difficult if you want to get out of the partnership. Depending on how your structure is set up and your documents, it's going to be a lot more difficult to do so. Okay, so corporations. So C Corps, S Corps are both corporations that create separate legal entities that are apart from an individual. So the distinctions between the two are in taxes and then shareholders, stock classifications, and reportings. So corporations are a bit more complicated versus like an LLC or a partnership. There's a lot more paperwork involved. The great thing though is there's no personal liability. So, like when McDonald's gets sued, McDonald's is sued. Target is sued, Target is sued. They're a corporation. The other thing too is there's a pass-through entity, meaning that the taxes don't necessarily hit the corporation. They're going to go through to the employees individually. But depending on the structure, that could change and there's different semantics behind that. And I always make the disclaimer that I am not a tax attorney. And so you always want to talk to a tax professional so you can truly understand the tax implications based on the structure of your business. Some other things about S Corps. You're limited to 100 shareholders and a single class of stock. And so, again, this is very important for and maybe investment purposes. If you only have so many shares, that's so many shareholders to go around and divvy up. If multiple people or organizations want to invest in your business or give you certain opportunities, they may want shares or types of stock that they can trade and do different things with. But if you're not set up in a way that's going to be appealing to them or profitable for them, that could cause an issue in the long run. So now C Corps, there's no personal liability on the shareholders. You have unlimited classes of stocks and it's completely separate from the shareholders. But the issue with C corps is you have double taxation. So that means you're getting taxed as a corporation, the company itself, and then it still passes through to the owners and the employees. Also, more regulations and more paperwork and strict management. So now nonprofits, talk about this structure. So nonprofits, also known as a 501(c)(3), these are corporations that are organized to do charity, educational, religious, or literary work. And so the biggest part about a corporation is that you're not going, or a nonprofit corporation, is you're not going into business to make money. Maybe you want to make money so you can give it away or buy supplies for a charitable, religious, or educational purpose. But the main purpose of it is to do some sort of good works for the community. So the pros with that is there's no state or federal income taxes. You have limited liability, and then people can get tax deductions for making donations. So people love, they'll say, oh, come donate to my nonprofit. We'll give you a tax receipt so you can write it off for your taxes. So it's a good way to be able to generate profit. So that way, you can then use that for your charitable purpose. Cons with that, though, are their salary limitations. So, like I said, a nonprofit is put in place to do charitable work and to give opportunities to the community in some way. And so, if you're running a charity, and you'll see this sometimes in the news where like there are scams because you find out that people are paying themselves ridiculous salaries with their nonprofit, but then when you look at the work that they're actually doing, they're not making an impact that reflects why they deserve the salary. And so that's something to note is the higher income that maybe you're going to be generating, it could reflect poorly and you could lose that designation and be subject to tax penalties and sometimes even prison time. The other thing too is you have limited control with a nonprofit. And then again, there's a lot of legal compliance requirements because there's different types of designations for nonprofits depending on how much money you bring in. You have to file a lot of paperwork with the IRS. And so it's just a much more strict burden to meet to make sure that you fit into a category for a nonprofit. Okay, so right now I'm going to do a temperature check and just see if everyone's good, if we have any questions right now, if we're good to keep rolling. Okay, think so. So next is LLC. So this is probably the most popular and common structure that small business owners will have because they not only benefit the corporation, but they also are going to benefit the partnership that you have with whomever it is you're going into business with. So the pros for an LLC is you have protection from personal liability. So I always think of an LLC like a house. So you want to be inside the house and not outside the house. So your LLC, it's like a house protecting you from the liability and the elements going on around you. And so when you don't have an LLC, um, you're, like I said, exposed to more liability. The other thing too is there's pass-through taxation. You have more flexibility with the taxes, and it's simpler to manage just because of how the structure is set up. But the cons for that is there is still always a potential for liability with an LLC. So there's this legal phrase, it's called piercing the corporate veil. And this can happen with an LLC in a way where if you're doing business through your LLC, but then it turns out that you're conducting business in a way that is for your own personal gain in a negative way, you're committing crimes, you're engaging in some sort of unethical business transactions, you can pierce the corporate veil where your LLC no longer will protect you, and now the liability will flow straight to you. So I always tell people if you have an LLC, it's definitely an advantage, but you want to make sure that you're using it ethically and you're making sure that you're conducting business in a lawful manner. And when you're entering into transactions, you're doing it through your LLC. The other thing too is there could be ongoing compliance requirements. So in some states, you may have to continue to register every so many years with your LLC, whereas others, it could just run for forever. But then the other thing too is if you have to make changes to your members and like who is a member of the LLC, your different forms that you fill out when you register it with the state, you have to make sure that you keep up with that. It's not just like, oh, I got my LLC and I'm good. And then the other thing, again, there's going to be a specific tax designation with an LLC and worrying about your self-employment taxes. And so that's important to think about too. Okay. So now let's talk about what structure fits your goals. So you should be asking yourself these questions. So, how much personal liability am I willing to accept? So, thinking about when you're going into um, a business deal and thinking about, do I have the right structure where am I in the house? Am I going to be protected if something goes wrong? Or is this just a general partnership? Am I the general partner or am I not operating under any sort of filing? I don't have any type of structure for my business. I'm doing it myself through a sole proprietorship. Are you going to be liable if something goes wrong? When you entered into a contract, did you write down Marissa's Cupcakes LLC or did you just write Marissa Weatherly? And so when you're having a business, use it to your advantage. Your business, depending on how it's set up, it's a separate legal entity aside from you. And so it's really going to benefit you when you're entering into contracts where they're not going to be suing me individually. They're going to be suing my business. The other thing, taxes. Depending on how your structure is for your business and what type of income you have coming in, you could have multiple businesses or multiple jobs. So if you're having your business, but then you're also working a full-time job, are taxes appropriately being coming out of your check for your job that you're working? That's going to help offset or line up with your business taxes, or is it going to disadvantage you? So it's important to think about that. And then also, how much paperwork and compliance are you willing to handle? So, like I said, depending on your structure, you're going to have a lot more requirements to meet. And that includes if you're going to have certain classifications for your business, if you have to be certified for something, if you're going to have an LLC, but then maybe you want to be taxed a certain way based on your members. Like there's so many different little nuances. And so that's why I say talk to a tax professional. Every small business owner should, and just business owner in general, should definitely be talking to a tax professional so you can understand how your taxes are being affected personally and based off of your business. And then the other thing, will you need to access your business earnings for personal reasons? And so thinking about, do you have all your information, your ducks in a row? Do you have bookkeeping services? Are you keeping track of how am I getting my transactions and do I have all my receipts? How am I keeping a record of that? Because depending on your structure, again, that's going to affect you when it comes to taxes. So those are the things you should be asking when you're thinking about what structure do you have and what business are you conducting. Okay. So now we're going to move on to common mistakes. And so these are just things I think you should definitely be on the lookout for as far as mistakes that people make when it comes to their businesses. So forming no business at all. So like I said, the sole proprietorship thing, it's not the best idea. You're really exposing yourself to a lot of liability and you want to make sure you're protected. The next thing is overlooking long-term plans. So let's say you start off as an LLC and you're like, yeah, I'm just going to do these transactions, conduct business. But then you start moving towards a more charitable route and you realize, I want to be a nonprofit. I really want to make sure that I'm serving my community. And this is now my new path. You cannot go from an LLC to a 501(c)(3). Those are separate types of entities. And so it's really important to understand, how can I do this? How can I not do this? If I've invested all this time and resources in my LLC or maybe in my partnership, am I going to be able to reverse it? Or maybe you start off as a nonprofit and you realize I'm making a lot of money. I don't think the nonprofit is the route for me anymore. Are you able to go back? No. And so there's thinking about how are you going to do that? How are you going to set that up? Only focusing on the short-term tax benefits. So maybe right now an LLC is good. You like how the tax designations are working, but maybe you should be an S corp in the future or a C corp in a different type of corporation altogether. The other thing too is ignoring administrative requirements. However your business is set up, you need to go to your state Secretary of State website and look up what are the requirements for my business structure. Are there deadlines on how I have to file documents? Is it a yearly requirement? Are there fees that I have to pay? Do you know that? It's really important that you stay within compliance within your state for your business. Because again, if you get sued or you enter into a contract and you want to enforce the contract, you want to make sure that you're a valid legal business entity. The other thing is grants and different opportunities for funding. If your business loses its status or isn't set up properly, you're going to miss out on opportunities because you don't have a structure. And so pay attention to those administrative requirements that are on your Secretary of State's website. And you can go on there and look, and it will detail and tell you what it is that you need to have, how often you may need to file something, if you need to make updates. And so pay attention to those things. The other thing is not signing contracts. And these will be our next sections we're going to talk about. So, not signing contracts or not even having contracts. And I always tell people, please get a contract, write it down, get it in writing. I know for a fact there's many owners who have found themselves in a situation where you didn't have a contract and you wish you did. And now you lost out on opportunity or a client or something, and you're just putting yourself in a bad situation. Okay. And then the last thing is not trademarking. So again, if you're creating something and maybe it's a logo or your brand, a product or a service that you do special that no one else can do, a recipe, whatever it is, intellectual property law is very, very important. You want to trademark your logo. You want to get copyright depending on what it is you're trying to protect. And it's simple process. You can do it at the state level and you can also do it at the federal level. And so those are important things to make sure you're on the lookout for. Okay. So now I'm looking in the chat and I do see a question. So we have a question that says, can you go from a sole proprietorship to an S Corp? And the answer to that is yes. So you can do that because a sole proprietorship, it's the very basic general structure of not much. And so you can make an easier transition to go from an S Corp. So that's a good question. Okay. So our next section we'll be talking about is contracts. Why business contracts matter for your business. Okay. So why is it important to have a contract? So contracts clearly set and define expectations. They protect your interests and they create enforceable obligations. And so these are some common contracts that you may have for your business or you've seen before. So a service agreement. So if you're providing services, a common one is maybe like catering. Um, I've worked with a lot of business owners that do event planning. And so they have service agreements. You're providing a service to a customer for specific things. Another thing is an NDA. So maybe I've worked with people who are bartenders, like mobile bartending services, and they may have a certain way that they have their own special drinks or recipes. They may have a certain way that they reach out to clients or, do different solicitation obligations or transactions with others. So you may have an NDA for that, and that's just a non-disclosure agreement. So a non-disclosure agreement means I'm going to share information with you as an employee about my business, or maybe even as with a contractor. So maybe they're not an employee of yours, but they're a contractor. And so you say, while you're working with me, I'm going to share information with you. And so you're going to have to sign this NDA. That means you can't tell people about my pricing. So maybe I'm going to charge $500 for this service, but it's only going to really cost me $150 to get all the materials. So now I'm going to make a $350 profit. You might not want them to know that. That's a part of your business model, how you make money, how you operate. And so you may say, I want you to sign an NDA, meaning you can't share this information, you can't talk about this information. And if you do, and I find out that you do, I have this NDA and now you're getting sued. And so those are popular ones. Another one is non-solicit agreements. And so I've worked with business owners in the fitness industry, and this is a big one where maybe they work for a gym or they start like a fitness program. And so they have certain clients. I've definitely seen it before where they did not have their trainer sign non-solicitation agreements and they leave them and take all of their clients. And they're like, what can I do? And I'm like, nothing. Because you didn't have any agreements in place. There was nothing implied to say that they could not come in and take your clients. And so you want to make sure if you're working in that avenue, not just fitness, but with someone where you're sharing client information, you're sharing your contact list, you might want a non-solicitation agreement and also an NDA because you may not want to share your client list like, oh, yeah, they use my services. You may not want that information out. The other thing is independent contractor agreements. So if you, like I said, work doing services, providing a certain service for someone, you may then say, oh, I'm going to now work with a DJ. If I'm the caterer, I also now want to do event management in general. So I'm going to have this DJ come in. You will want an independent contractor agreement because if they're coming under you as the event planner and you're telling your client, I'm going to provide DJ, don't worry. So you'll just pay me and I'll pay them, or maybe they get paid, but there's still going to be a reflection of your business. That customer may not know, oh, well, the DJ, they work with Marissa. Well, they're not my DJ. I'm just partnering with them. So you want to make sure that there's a clear separation, that they're providing a certain service and they're contracting for you. Another thing is a partnership agreement. So we talked about in our business structures how you can enter into a partnership with someone just simply by starting to do business together. That's why you want an agreement. So a partnership agreement would clearly detail Marissa is the general partner. She has the opportunity in order for something to enter into a contract. Marissa has to give her say. If Marissa doesn't, then the agreement can't happen, or you need somebody's permission. Does that person have access to the bank accounts, or does only one person have access to the bank accounts? Who can put you on the line for something? The partnership agreement will clearly set those limitations and boundaries so you're able to see we're not offering additional services or we're not, providing additional information and it's set forth in that partnership agreement. And then another common contract is an operating agreement. So an operating agreement is typically in place when you have an LLC. So when you have an LLC, you're going to have an operating agreement. Your operating agreement does the same thing. It will outline what your business is, who you are, who the members are, and what obligations and kind of boundaries are in place for your LLC. So usually in those, it's going to say um, a certain person owns 60% of the company, and then it's broken down. It'll have the names of your members of your LLC. And then it'll talk about, what happens if someone passes away or if somebody wants to sell their ownership in the LLC. Are they able to do that? Do they need permission? Do you have to take a vote? But then the other thing about an operating agreement is this is one document that will show the legitimacy of your business. So when you are entering into a contract, maybe to go get a loan or apply for a grant, and you're doing an application, if you have an operating agreement, that's going to show the bank or that agency that's providing whatever funding it is, oh, you're serious because you don't just have a registration with the state, you also have an operating agreement because it's going to dictate in the event that there's some sort of liability or an issue, your operating agreement exists. Or also when you get sued, If you go online now to your state's website, you'll search and you can find hundreds and thousands of businesses registered with the state. But I guarantee you, all of those LLCs registered, that doesn't necessarily mean they're active, they're operating. Some of the information may not be up to date. If you ever have to go to court or like you want to really prove that my business is legitimate, an operating agreement is going to do that for you. And so that's something you can get. There's templates online that will walk you through, and I have some as well that are just super important and helpful for you to have in your back pocket to just reinforce the legitimacy of your business. Okay. All right. So just trying to be mindful of time. Okay. So some common red flags in contracts. What should you look out for in a contract? Vague language, if it's one-sided, hidden fees or penalties, no dispute resolution clauses, and then if it has missing information such as dates or a timeline. This is often an issue. You get into a contract and it doesn't really say like, okay, when is this due? When are you supposed to give me something? So if you're going to contract with someone to provide your business with something, marketing services, or maybe they're going to build something for you, or whatever it may be, or a contract with another person, or a service agreement. This counts for those too. And it doesn't have clear information about how much are you getting paid? When are you getting paid? What happens if they don't provide payment? And this happens with customers too, and your clients. If you're working with them, you need to make sure that your service agreements, your contracts, whatever type of agreement you have with them, it needs to have these key information points. So, dispute resolution. Do you want them to be able to just go sue you, or do you want to try to do mediation first? You can put that in the contract and say, in the event there is a dispute, we will go through mediation first, where both parties agree that we're going to have a discussion via Zoom. You can get very specific about it. And then, in the event that there's no resolution, we will then be able to default to the court. And so it's important that you have that information in your contracts. The other thing too is if it's one-sided. I see this a lot with leases, like commercial leases. And a lot of people think like, oh, well, if I'm going to rent out a space for my business, I just have to go along with what they say because they're the business and they're trying to give me the space. I want to get in there. No, you can negotiate. You can say, well, how come it says if I don't do this thing, I have to pay? What happens if you guys don't live up to your bargain? So let's say you're in a commercial lease and for your business and they say they're going to do trash removal and they're going to do cover utilities. What happens when they stop coming to take the trash? Is that addressed? Do you know? Are they on the hook for anything? If they stop paying utilities that they said they were going to pay. So you want to make sure you're reading those contracts through and you understand, am I on the hook? But what if they're on the hook? What obligation do they have? And so don't count yourself out just because you're a small business owner. You still have negotiating power and you still need to give yourself that fair shot to spot a red flag in a contract, to be able to call it out and say, this is one-sided. It's not fair. Information doesn't really make sense. So don't be quick to sign anything. Look it over, take your time. And this is another good use of AI. But I would say I think AI is great, but it also can be a little bit hurtful at times because at the end of the day, it's a platform that is fed into information based on what you tell it. And it's not always going to think of where I like to say play devil's advocate with you. So if you are using AI, I encourage you to make sure you're having it challenge whatever information you're giving it. So that's my little tip about the AI. But you can use them to create your contracts, especially the basic information, and then also just to help you spot information that maybe you think this doesn't look good. Okay, and so then our last section we're going to talk about before we get to our interactive scenarios is trademarks and IP. And so intellectual property, do I need a trademark? So intellectual property is essentially the intangible value your business creates. So that means it's not necessarily something you can always hold in your hand. It can be, but it's just something that it's going to live on through how you're doing business. So your business's name, the logo, your products, your inventions, your content. And so, what types of intellectual property are there? There's copyrights, patents, trademarks or service marks, and then trade secrets. And so, trademarks or service marks, I want to kind of focus mainly on this one because I'm not sure if people have heard of service marks as much as trademarks. So, a trademark is obviously you can trademark your logo or like a phrase or something that's designated with your business. So, for example, like McDonald's, I'm loving it, the McDonald's logo. But then a service mark is like goes into the service that your business provides. And so people don't know that if you have a unique service that you provide, you can get that service marked. And so that's something to be knowledgeable about is it doesn't just cover like intellectual property doesn't just cover a logo or your brand name. It also can go over into the service that you provide, but it has to be specific and detailed and unique. And then something to think about too is intellectual property can be protected at the state level and the federal level. So generally, I try to educate people to think about this. When you first start off with your business, you might not have any followers on social media. You might not have that many clients, or maybe you have one client, and maybe it's a relative or a family member. So people will come and say, my business is going to be huge. I need to get everything trademarked and copyright and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, okay, well, let's start at the state level. And they're like, no, I need federal because I already know it's going to go global and major. That's awesome. And I believe in you. And with hard work, yes, it will. However, state protection is just as important as federal protection. And the reason for that is because it sets a precedent out there that you're doing business and it's something that can be located and found. And so you want to create a trail that shows, look, I'm doing my business. So even if you don't have the federal mark yet, courts will look and say, well, they have a state trademark, and you had knowledge, you had reason to know and to look that they're doing business in the state, in this state. So you should have been on the lookout and noticed that. And so it does help in that way. Also, it's much cheaper and it's much faster. So definitely when you're looking at intellectual property and thinking of, branding and protecting yourself, don't count it out at the state level. I often have a lot of clients who'll say, "No, I want federal only." No. Let's start at the state level, get you accustomed to it, and it's going to, like I said, it sets that precedent to put you out there that you are doing business. And there's a look back period where they're on notice. You're putting the world and the state on notice. And, with social media and just technology, people can find that information. Okay. So here are some IP mistakes to avoid. Sharing trade secrets without protection. So we talked a little bit about this with like an NDA, non-solicit agreement. A trade secret, what is that unique thing that your business does that makes it important and special that you don't want out there? So don't just share information willingly with people. I know we get excited, we want to talk about our business and give people information, but some information should not be shared. The other thing is using generic names. Like I said, if you go online now, not only can you search on the Secretary of your state's website, you can look at the business names, but you can also search logo trademarks. So you can search business names, trademarks, things like that. It's all public record, public knowledge. And so you want to make sure you're not using generic names when you're trademarking something. One, it likely will not hold up in court. And a lot of times it'll get rejected by the state. They'll say this is too much of a generic. So what do I mean by generic is like, um, let's say I was talking about cupcakes earlier, so maybe I'd say something like, um, I don't know, classy cupcakes or something. So maybe that's my tagline in my name that I like to say, and I want people to look it up. I make cupcakes for like classy events. I don't know, just made that up. But if somebody were going to search that and look that up, does it already exist? Is that too generic? Or do you need to also put your name in front of it? Do you need to change a letter? Do you need to do your research? Because the same way you don't want anybody to take your idea, you ever have that feeling where like I thought I was the only one that thought that or the only one that did that? You'd be surprised. So even with your business names and like your things you want to trademark or get copyright protection on, it may already exist. So how can you tweak yours to make it less generic or maybe more specific and unique? And then the other thing is ignoring copyright on images and music. This is another thing that I've seen happen often where business owners are receiving cease and desist letters from companies for using an image on their website or music on their website without permission. And so be careful. If you're selling a product or providing a service and you have a website, your social media, and you're marketing in a certain way, you really want to make sure that you're being aware that are you using copyright protected um, images or music, because it can be taken down, but also depending on the company, they will not only send a cease and desist, they will also demand money and say, I'm demanding um, $1,000 in damages for each violation. And that's legal under the law. Now, if something like that does happen to you, you definitely want to get an attorney to help you review the letter that they send you. And then also, there's ways that you can kind of get around it depending on the nature of how you were using their image or their music. So don't always just immediately, pay something, a demand letter. You want to make sure it's legitimate, but it is something that I have seen happen. Okay. So we got about 10 minutes left. So we're going to quickly go through these scenarios. So now at this point, we're going to talk about, and I encourage you all to come off mute and just pitch in and chime in to these different scenarios where they talk about business structure issues, issues with contracts, and issues with IP. And so I want you guys to kind of think about what we talked about throughout this session and kind of chime in. Okay. So this first one, Maria wants to open a food truck with her cousin Hector. Both Hector and Maria are great cooks. They've developed recipes together. Maria has $10,000 and is looking to buy a food truck, but she only wants to pay $5,000. What she doesn't know is Hector talked to his friend Joe and offered to buy his food truck for $7,000. Hector told Joe all about his business venture with Maria and shared details about their secret recipes. So, what type of business, if any, do Hector and Maria have? Have any contracts been created? And then what liability or risks have been created? And like I said, feel free to just come off mute or you can put it in the chat if you don't want to speak. Let's see if anybody has any thoughts on the situation with Maria.
Well, this is Sabrina.
Hi,
It
Sabrina.
just sound it just sounds like Maria and Hector are just getting started. It doesn't sound like they've done anything in the way of forming a partnership or LLC. And it sounds like Hector made a crucial mistake by sharing his whole plan without formalizing it, especially the secret recipes.
Right. That's great. Thank you so much for chiming in on that. So, yeah, he definitely shared way too much, sharing the secret recipes. So, there's no NDA with him. He hasn't talked with Joe and said, sign this before I tell you this. Another thing, too, is even though they haven't signed any contracts to be like a LLC or a partnership, because Maria and Hector work so closely together, and he's basically putting himself out there as a representative of her business, she could potentially be liable to buy the food truck from Joe. And so this is something that can happen. If a person reasonably relies on a statement made by a third party for a contract, and let's say that Joe was going to buy another food truck, and then he said, "Never mind, this one's cheaper. They're going to sell it to me for 7,000," and he lost out on another one. Um, Now he could potentially, like, if he said, "Oh, somebody's going to buy it," and he could potentially sue them for lost opportunity. And so these are the things that like an attorney can help you think about is, I didn't think I would be on the hook for this, but you might be, even though you didn't sign anything, if someone reasonably relies on it. And so it will be much harder to prove, but we would need more facts. But that's a great response. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next one. This one is Carla's contract. Okay, so Carla's a baker who recently hired Robert, who was a graphic designer, to help rebrand her business and create a logo. So she paid 50% of the 600 contract price. So she paid $300. And after 2 weeks, Robert stopped responding and he delivered nothing. Carla signed a contract with Robert, but realized it has no completion date. So, what are her rights to get the product and a refund? And then, what information should Carla have put in the contract?
I can try and take this one.
Right.
So she definitely should have put a completion date. Timeline is critical, right? You got to have that. And I'm as far as getting a refund or a finished product, she's probably got to push her limits a little and see if she can get Robert. But until there is actually a timeline or completion date in there, I don't know how many legal rights she's got. So I'm not sure on that one.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. That was really great. Yeah, so she definitely should have put that completion date. So this is an example of a vague contract. She didn't have the necessary information in there to protect herself. And the other thing too is there's no information in there about what would happen if he didn't deliver because she didn't even put a time. So I think for this one, she would definitely have to keep pushing him and she might even have to sue him in small claims court. And so then you think about, would it be worth it? And so think about your own situations. If you're going to do business with someone, is it worth it to even sue them? And if you are suing them, how much is that going to cost? And can you recover damages for the fact that you even had to sue them? And if you can get your court costs back and everything. But that's why it's so important to make sure you put all that info in the contract. Okay. And then our last one is about intellectual property. Okay, so this one, Tony sells computers and cell phones in his spare time, and his business takes off. He starts making t-shirts and business cards with the name Tony's Tech. 2 months later, he receives a cease and desist letter from a company called Tony's Tech Gurus, claiming he's infringing on their name. He's already spent $1,000 on shirts, his website, and business cards. So, one, what type of business does Tony have? Does he have to stop selling the shirts and other items? And what should he have done prior to making the shirts?
I guess I'll go again.
Okay, thank you.
No business because he hasn't done anything. He just said, "Hey, I want to do this." He yes has to stop doing all of those things, and he should have done some trademark and research before he just said Tony's Tech is like super exclusive. No one definitely has that, and made sure that he's not infringing on anyone else's.
Yes, that's perfect answer. So true. He doesn't have a business. He hasn't registered anything. So how would anyone know to look for him, for one? And so the other thing too is, like you said, he does have to stop selling and he should have looked everything up prior to investing all of this money. Because at this point, Now because Tony's Tech Gurus, they may have copyrighted just Tony's Tech plus Tony's Tech Gurus. And if that's the common name that they're referred to as, now he could be infringing where people are getting confused. And so you'll see this happen a lot where brands start to sue other brands, especially like the knockoffs in the store, where you'll see like a certain type of ketchup or a certain type of soda or chips, and they sue each other because they're like, your knockoff is so close to my original, people are getting confused. And so people can sue for that. Okay, so that wraps up the presentation. And so if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat or reach out. And that's this time I'm going to turn it over to Karen.
Yes, and I want to thank everyone for coming, and we'll let you ask some questions. We also want to let each of you guys know that I just put a link in the chat that goes to the Nevada SBDC's SSBCI advising program. All you need to do is click that link and fill out the information there. They'll be in contact and send you through either our group or some other group to get any of your questions answered outside of this forum. So we hope to talk to you guys soon, but please click that link and hopefully we can help you or somebody within the SBDC can help you as well. And then I'll turn it over for questions. I just want to make sure we got that in there.
Hi, this is Sabrina. I do have one question for Marissa. So, Marissa, I'm thinking about starting up a business, and the name I picked happens to be the name of a brick and mortar store that's already open. But my business is going to be online only. Um, what kind of a conflict do I have there?
Yeah, so there's different conflicts that you'll have. The one is typically on your Secretary of State website, when you go to create a business name, they make you do a business search. And so you'll type in the name that you want your business to be. And if it finds one that is similar or too similar, it won't let you do it. So that's like one issue that you could potentially face, depending on that, to see if it's available. Because what will happen is they'll let you go through all the prompts, but then it's going to get reviewed on the back end by someone within the business sector of the Secretary of State. And then they'll see, like, oh, this is too close to another. Your application is rejected. You have to try again. And so, what I would say is if you can find a way to change the name just a little bit or put something like a different flair on it, then that's fine. Whether it's like a change of the spelling of something, that would be really helpful because ultimately you can't avoid completely of having similar names to some degree. But if it's like exactly the same, it's going to be an issue. And you just want to make sure you're protecting yourself and people don't get confused. And if this other business gets wind of yours, if they're like, oh, this is too close, and even just how you market yourself, if you're going to be selling something different or providing a different service, you want to make sure that that's reflected with whatever you're doing and how you're doing business, whether that's your website later on, your social media. So that will help break up the confusion. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Of course. Okay. See if we have any more. And then, okay.
All right. And any other questions?
I just wanted to say thank you so much for all the insight. It was amazing, Marissa. I really, really appreciate all the information you shared over.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And we did record this, so we will send it through the SBDC network, probably toward the end of the week, beginning of next week. So if you need this video or like this video, just request it through that group. That application will get you the same people, and they can send it out to you if you wanted to review it later on.
Thanks again.
Yep.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Bye.